Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dogco Secrets podcast. My name is Michelle Kline. I'm your host. I am also the founder of Dogco Launch, where pet care companies come to grow and scale. In today's podcast episode, I want to have a conversation about regrouping off of quarter one. So we are at the start of April. We are going into quarter two. And so I want to have a conversation about both regrouping and refocusing to go into quarter two strong. So let's get into it. All right, we're about 90 days in to the year, which is kind of crazy. Quarter one was wild for a lot of companies I worked with. And I wanted to do this episode because I thought it was a really good time to regroup off of the start of the year. Many companies I work with, myself included as an owner for my own company, had and have really big goals for this year. It's a very natural point in time to kind of take a step back, look at how the year's going so far, and just reorganize and reorient to your goals. Probably about 2 years ago, I really started looking at the year in quarters. That's been really helpful for me to start doing. Because I think 90 days is the perfect amount of time for both sprinting and planning. I tend to see things in 90-day sprints and 90-day goals. I usually have high-level goals for the whole year that I want to make sure the quarters track to. But that 90-day focus, it's enough time you have to follow through with things. Like you can't get shiny object, ooh, let's try this. Like I have a plan, I'm going to stick to it. I have my priorities that I'm going to focus on, but it's short enough that you can kind of course correct and pivot through the year. You're not really locked in on things that, aren't working or aren't serving your business. So I wanted to start with some guided reflection, I guess you'd say, for quarter one, just to help companies slow down, think about how the quarter went. And I figured the best way to do that was just to share some lessons I'm learning on my end, because we have enough data now to get a better idea. So let's settle in. Let's do this. All right. So when I am looking back at quarter one, I always set 3 goals for the year. I force myself to limit myself to 3. Typically, that's going to be one business goal. So one like high level goal, like either a revenue goal or, something big. So one big business goal for the year. I then set one personal goal for myself as far as my life's trajectory. So whether that's a savings goal or a paying off debt goal or a investment I want to make this year. So I have one business goal, one personal goal, usually financial. And then I have one like health goal focus for the year. So every time that I goal set, those are the 3 that I like to pick. So when I'm looking back at quarter one, the first thing I like to do personally is kind of take a look at if I'm going to hit my goals this year, I should be about 25% of the way at this point in time in the year, unless there's some major variable that's going to change in quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4 that I already know about. Theoretically, I should be about 25% of the way there. So I always start with a check-in there. And then I kind of take a step back and look at what are the lessons that came up that were either unexpected. They could be good lessons, like they don't necessarily have to be lessons that were painful or hard to learn. They can also be like positive things kind of in service of where I want to go. But that's kind of how my check-in looks. Like before I get to any kind of course correction, any type of planning, any type of like, what am I going to do differently? I always start with truly just trying to take a step back. How did it go? I used to do this on an annual basis. Now I do it on quarterly because I'm trying to like shorten the window of time that it takes for me to make meaningful progress forward. I don't want to wait a year. I want 90-day sprints. Okay, so I'm going to share my biggest takeaways from quarter one because it was quite the quarter. I have a new belief that I have formed, which is if there isn't a system, there isn't a commitment. So the further I get into business, the more that I see so much of what business owners put time into is these like one-off sprints of energy into a project or into some kind of focus they want to move forward. And that's how everything starts, right? Like you have something that you see as an opportunity, something that you want to do. So you apply effort and force into it. And then I am seeing that is where most people, myself included, stop. I'm coming to believe, I have come to believe that the people that are then able to take that momentum and turn it into something that they can sustain long term, they have to move from one-time expenses of effort to a system that sustains whatever the activity is. Now, that system will still require effort to move it forward on a continued basis. But when we have a system, we can strategically look at, does my effort need to continue to carry this system forward? Should I apply somebody else's effort? Is there like a tool or something like that that can also move this system forward? But if we don't have a system, the system is your continued one time, like pushes of effort forward. And it's incredibly unsustainable. And I have seen myself approach work that way, especially this last quarter, and realized that the growth of my business moving forward is going to be in systems that continue to perpetuate the growth moving forward in perpetuity. So if there isn't a system, there isn't a commitment. And that is something I'm putting a lot of time into thinking about, especially because I'm trying to ditch as many limiting beliefs as I can right now. And I have found, I think I've shared this on the podcast before because this isn't necessarily new news to me, but I'm still trying to shed this identity. Somewhere along the line, I picked up this like kind of identity marker of like, I am not a systems person. Like that building systems is like difficult for me or something I can't do. And that is not serving me. Nor do I think that has to be true. Like I am a smart person. I can figure out how to build good systems. I do think it's true that is not usually the first place my brain goes to. Like my brain goes to, I see an opportunity, not how do we take this opportunity and systematize it. But that doesn't mean I can't figure out how to do that or figure out how to be that person, especially if my business needs it. So that is something I'm trying to apply more force, more strategy into right now, because I definitely came into this year with a how can I move a lot of things forward in my business type mindset, rather than how can I build systems that let us leverage and apply force strategically across all the areas that the business needs. Learning lessons for me as a growing business as well. And I always want to bring that into the podcast because I am learning and grow. I don't think I've ever learned or grown more than I have in the last 6 months. And that's really cool. It's been very tiring, but in a good way, like in an energizing way. And I feel really, really thankful to have put myself in the position where I was forced to grow. So that's a cool thing. Second thing, and this is also a systems reflection that I have taken from quarter 1, and I'm doing this to kind of model how you could also take a step out of the noise, out of the busyness, to look back the last quarter to do some reflection yourself, because I think it is so important. So I want to lead by that example. Okay, so second thing that has come up for me in looking at the last quarter is that when you organize your team and you organize the workflow of your team, you increase output. So for the last year, because the Dogco team was so much smaller in 2025, we did not really have to have like an organized workflow because it was me and my one full-time administrative assistant. And we kind of just got to stay like very connected on what we were doing and, just stay in touch on it, basically. And now that the Dogco team is closer to 20 people, it doesn't work that way anymore. So this year we've had a much bigger focus on organizing, capturing information, and putting it into project flows. And we're still like, I would say maybe 10% in to what we truly need, but I'm bought in on the idea. We've been building out in Notion. I'm not tied to that as the project management platform that you use. It is working really well for us, I will say. And I think the benefit and the output compared to the price point feels like really right to me. Several months ago, we started, when I say we, my operations coordinator, who was last year my administrative assistant, really has taken the lead on this and done a phenomenal job. Every meeting that we have as a team is captured inside of this platform. turned into checklists and to-do lists for visibility and accountability across all of like the internal admin side of Dogco. And that I kind of can't believe I've ever operated a business without that kind of visibility. And so I'm really bought into, as we continue into this year, building out more like visibility into project management and planning so that there's a structured way that we know what's been committed to, where is the status of what that thing is, who is responsible for it, and how can we all see what that is. It's just so important. And kind of along that side, I've been really, really pushing myself to go digital with my workflow management. I love to write things down. I mean, even planning for this episode, if you're watching on YouTube, I have like a yellow legal pad. I just like to write things down. So I guess this proves I've not fully adapted to a digital system yet. But I am seeing the benefit of when something is digital, you can organize it in the way that it lasts forever. And you can access it later and you can kind of continue off of these thoughts. When it's written, you're starting over every time. So I have very much been pushing myself. Everything's digital, everything's captured digitally. And these are just growth areas that I know I need to continue to lean into for the rest of the year. And then I would say my final reflection for quarter one, and these are like more principle level. I'm still kind of getting into the minutia of like the data and takeaways from that. But I like to start principle level and then kind of drill further down. So the third principle level takeaway that I have is actually a mantra that I have adopted that I'm very bought into, which is this idea of purpose, not panic. I don't think anything productive comes from panic. And I have come to realize that if I'm going to continue to be the kind of person that really pushes myself and sets very big goals, that if I operate on a day-to-day basis out of a place of panic and anxiety about reaching those goals, I'm going to drive myself absolutely nuts. I will not be able to sustain that. It's going to take me down. So I have to adjust to the way that I see my progress towards big goals to be purposeful and not panic driven. So anytime I start to feel that kind of like welling of panic coming up, I've started kind of this frame break mentally where I then step out of it and say, how can I be purposeful in this moment around whatever I am feeling rather than continuing to give into the panic? Because I don't believe that serves us. I know it doesn't serve me. Okay, so those are high level reflections quarter one. So this podcast has 3 phases. Regroup, which is the phase I just went through. So take the time to look at the last quarter. Look at the principal level lessons that you can take, maybe like goals, orientations, leaning towards like the rest of the year. Second phase is refocus, and third phase is relaunch. So let's talk about refocusing. This is where I want you to get really tactical about measuring your goals against what you set for the entire year. So we kind of started the podcast with this framing. Listen, it's very rare that a year progresses like perfect linear growth towards a goal. So when I say you should be 25% on the way, you're probably not going to be. So if you are feeling that is really discouraging because I'm not seeing this like progressive, like every month we're just getting closer, depending on the goal, that's less realistic or more. But at this point in the year, I do want to see clear indications like what I am putting out is working towards getting me that return. And if I don't see that by like this point in the year, usually I'm going back to the drawing board. So I've given this example a lot in the podcast, but last year I had a really big reframe here when it came to my fitness goal. So as I said, I always set 3 goals: big business goal, personal financial goal, usually something around like kind of personal life moving forward, and then a fitness goal or a health goal. And last year I had set a goal that would be the year I would start getting really consistent about exercising and going to the gym or moving my body. That was the entire focus of my year. And 60 days in, there was no meaningful improvement. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to introduce a new element here because me just trying to create, like the system wasn't working. It just wasn't happening. And so that was when I started working out with a trainer because I was like, okay, I am not self-generating this accountability. And we are now 60 days in, and I have no reason to believe that's going to start happening, I have to introduce a new element. So 60 to 90 days is when I look at that for all of my goals and go from there. So I want to encourage you to take a look at what that high level goal that you set in place for this year is and look at, are we headed in the trajectory that's going to meet that goal? Maybe, we're still kind of in the phase where we're having to put in a lot before we see a return. But I would say at this point, you need to have some indications that that is coming back around for you. And if not, we might want to introduce new variables into the game to get you to your goals. Let's say your goal this year is to increase your take home pay from your pet care company. There are kind of two components of increasing personal pay when it comes from your business. It is both growing top line revenue so that there is just more to work with. But usually also there's an element of increasing personal take home pay where we then have to go into the mechanics of your business and start playing really strong defense on your profit margin. Because, you can have $1 million a year business that's spending $1 million to run and not take anything home. That is absolutely possible. So there are kind of two elements to personal take home pay. 90 days into the year, you might not be seeing the top line revenue growth yet in your pet care company. Quarter 1 for many, many businesses is not their strongest performing quarter out of the year, especially January, February. And this quarter specifically had a lot of weird weather elements across a lot of different places in the country that were very revenue disruptive. So you may not yet be seeing top line revenue growth. Now that we're heading into April, I will say some of your lead flow strategies should, if they're going to be effective, they should be starting to work for you a bit more than they were at the start of the year. So if you're still not seeing an increase in lead flow or client spending, we might be at the place where it's let's try some different strategies, not just continue putting things in. But, I wouldn't expect crazy top line revenue growth Quarter 1. I have some companies that have seen it, but I wouldn't say that's the norm. However, if you also have had a big erosion of your profit margin, then it's okay, maybe one of these things we can suspend in disbelief. Let's continue putting in inputs to get into Quarter 2. We don't have yet enough time in the right time of the year. But if your profit margin is also going down, then it's okay, we might need to come in and kind of reshape what you're doing because we may not be on track. So that's an example of how I think about measuring progress for this year. It doesn't necessarily have to be this consistent upward trend trajectory. I would say for many, our business, and by our, I mean the pet care space, does have seasonal trends. I don't think you should be a victim to them. I think you should still push your business and push yourself to continue progress forward. And it's absolutely possible. But there also is a reality. People tend to spend less on their pets in January than they will in April. Those tend to be very different revenue looking months for many, many, many companies that I work with. And so, it may not be progressive, but we want to be directionally correct at this point in the year. You should see signs. So if you are not, we want to figure out, do you need to pivot? Do you need to realign to original strategies that you had planned in Q1 that maybe fell off or we didn't execute as well as we could have? Or do we need to fully go back to the drawing board? And I would just say that's why having that big, audacious, wildly ambitious goal for the year is important, because that gives you something to kind of follow the direction of, even though we have to have a long enough time horizon in the way that we think about it. We're not going to hit progress every single day, most likely. It's not going to feel like we are. I still think you can move your business forward on a daily basis in a measurable way. We just have to learn how to kind of look forward and to extend that vision and that viewpoint. Okay, so that brings us, we've been through regrouping, we've been through refocusing, and now let's talk a little bit about relaunching. So we are going into Quarter 2. We are still so young in this year. So even if you aren't seeing the progress you want yet, even if you aren't tracking towards those goals yet, there is still so much time. So what I want you to do, take all the information that we just pulled from our principal level thinking, from getting into the data, the metrics, measuring against that goal that you set for the rest of the year, and then put in place a 90-day strategic plan with only 3 priorities of how you are going to move forward for this second quarter. And I would say these three priorities should be directly related to that wildly ambitious goal, and ideally to getting to kind of a halfway point at the middle of the year. 90 days, I believe, is the perfect amount of time to have a focused sprint to get enough data, but also to not like entrench you in activities that you can't change, pivot, or course correct as we get into the summer. I am cheering you on. Let's keep doing it. So have a good one, everybody. Talk soon.